In this very in-depth forecast, the possibility of widespread messy to semi-discrete supercells is expected to bring the possibility of a few tornadoes, some of which could be strong, massive hailstones larger than 2 inches, and scattered damaging wind gusts. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for May 4th of 2024. I am still sick, so the video quality is still not going to be up to par with previous videos, as you could probably tell by my last video. But for today, we do have an enhanced risk for southwestern Texas here into central Texas, where we could see the potential of some widespread severe thunderstorms, as well as a slight risk for Illinois there, with a marginal risk that connects the two risk areas. Threats for today do include a 10% tornado risk for the enhanced risk region, where we could see the possibility of a few tornadoes, some of which could be strong, and we could see the potential for 1 or 2 brief tornadoes extend across central Texas. As far as our wind threat goes, we do have a 15% for both risk areas, one for the enhanced risk region and the slight risk region across central into western Texas and extreme southeastern New Mexico, as well as a 15% damaging wind risk for Illinois there, and that's going to be the primary risk for that slight risk up to the north. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 30% for the enhanced risk region, where we could see the possibility of some widespread massive hailstones greater than 2 inches, indicated by that hatched area. As far as the 5% hail risk goes, it extends up across the rest of the marginal risk, but we don't have a 15% for the slight risk region. I will probably not really be going over and covering the slight risk region. I just don't really have the energy to right now. So the most I can really do right now is go over the enhanced risk region for western Texas. But if you do live in the affected area, definitely make sure you're staying weather alert. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for south central Texas, with a marginal risk that extends up into eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, western Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, as well as a marginal risk for eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania into West Virginia. Risks for tomorrow do include a 2% tornado risk for the marginal risk area across Texas into Louisiana, as well as a 15% damaging wind risk for the slight risk region, as well as a 5% damaging wind risk for the marginal threat region up to the north there, as well as a 15% hail risk for the slight risk region. So damaging winds and large hail will be the primary drivers for that slight risk region, but we don't really have all that much of a hail risk for the marginal threat up to the north. For our day 3 outlook, we do have an enhanced risk for the central plains for southern Nebraska, central into eastern Kansas, and central Oklahoma. We do have a probabilistic combined 30% with the hatched area, where we could see the potential of some significant severe thunderstorms upcoming. That is definitely a possibility, and we are definitely watching for the possibility of a significant severe thunderstorm outbreak on our day 3 outlook, which is I'm pretty sure that is the 6th on Monday. So definitely make sure you're watching out for any updates regarding this system. And then for day 4, day 8 outlook, we do have a day 4 15% for the Ohio River Valley back into the Midwest and even back into the Mississippi River valleys for eastern Oklahoma, northeastern Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Kentucky, Indiana, southern Michigan, western Ohio, and southern Wisconsin. And day 5, 15% for the majority of the Ohio River Valley back into the Central Plains. For our excessive rainfall outlooks for today, we do have a slight risk for central Texas into eastern Texas, as well as southern Oklahoma, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding. We also have a marginal risk for portions of the eastern seaboard and the Appalachian Mountains region for Ohio, eastern Kentucky, eastern Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia into Maryland, and portions of Pennsylvania there, as well as a marginal risk for the valley in central California there, where we could see the potential of some isolated flash flooding. For tomorrow, we do have a pretty broad slight risk that extends from southern Missouri, eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, eastern Louisiana, and eastern Texas. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for the Central Plains, for eastern Nebraska, eastern Kansas, into northern Oklahoma there, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding. Taking a look at our winter weather outlooks, for today, we are expected to see some widespread heavy snowfall for a lot of the elevated portions of the Rockies. For California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Nevada there, we could definitely see some pretty widespread and heavy rainfall from our elevated portions of those states. For our day 2 outlook, we do continue to see some pretty widespread and heavy rainfall or snowfall for elevated portions of the Rockies there. Same with our day 3 outlook. Taking a look at our 500 millibar winds as well as our surface observations and how those are going to work in conjunction to support the risk for severe thunderstorms for today. As of right now, we do have a pretty powerful subtropical jet for this time of year pushing into the region. I don't think that we're going to necessarily see this strong 500 millibar jet streak move into the region. It's likely going to be slowed down by a lot of the mountains across Mexico here. However, we could definitely see some pretty strong flow, but potentially make it over those mountains. But as of right now, when storms develop, we are expected to see 500 millibar flow upwards of 30 miles per hour, potentially reaching 40 miles per hour, but mainly around the mid to low 30s across this region, and that will be supportive of the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region and supply the necessary lift and the necessary shear. As far as speed shear, and then as far as our surface observations, we do have a surface low and a dry line that is set up across this region. I'm pretty sure that this is a trough. I don't know if that's necessarily a dry line or not. I really wish Radar Omega would make it so troughs and dry lines aren't the same thing on their surface observations. It's really annoying in my opinion. We also do have a stationary front that extends up across western Texas into central Oklahoma here. This is likely being picked up as a differential heating boundary, and that's what storms are expected to fire off on. We are expected to see our storms trigger along that differential heating boundary, and that will be the initial tornado risk. But then we are also expected to see additional development along this dry line here that will fire off a couple more supercells that could also support the potential of a few tornadoes, and some of which could definitely be strong. Taking a look at our 850 millibars and our low-level jet and how that will affect our directional shear and our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see a pretty weaker and low-level jet develop across this region with 850 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of the upper 29s to 30 miles per hour across this region. Definitely a pretty weak low-level jet. So you can kind of fill in the gaps here and understand that we are expected to see some quite remarkable instability across this region that will be supportive of a strong tornado across this region. That is definitely possible amongst a weaker low-level jet across this region. We should definitely see much more subtle directional shear across this region. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that will affect our speed shear as well as our overall risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are seeing a pretty powerful 200 millibar jet that is moving into this region with 200 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of the upper 90s to potentially even the low 100 knots across this region, which will definitely supply this region with a very large amount of speed shear. Even amongst a weaker 500 millibar flow, we could still see the possibility of some massive hailstones across this region, and that's primarily the reason why we don't have a higher hail risk across this region is because we have weaker 500 millibar flow. But if we had stronger 500 millibar flow, then we could definitely see a larger hail risk. But still, definitely a lot of speed shear that's going to come out of this, and we can still see the potential for some widespread massive hailstones. And then as far as the spreading of our wind vectors go, you can definitely notice some pretty subtle, pretty noticeable though, spreading of our wind vectors there. Definitely a lot of defluence across this region, and that will definitely be supportive of a lot of lift across this region. Very supportive and be very large, be a very aiding factor to our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Taking a look at our storm relative velocity and how that will affect our tornado risk across this region. As I previously mentioned, we are expected to see much more subtle storm relative velocity across this region. We are expected to see it increase as storms move out of the region. We have less instability across this region and more convective inhibition. So we will have that balance out to be a little bit more of a lower end risk for tornadoes as the low level jet continues to increase as storms move towards central Texas. However, as storms move through the 10% tornado risk with the possibility of strong tornadoes, we will see stormlet to felicity values that are probably going to be lingering around the mid 100s, maybe reaching the upper 100s in some regions, but mainly lingering around the 100s, which is definitely much more subtle. And if we didn't have strong instability, then we definitely wouldn't see the potential for a strong tornado. But if you fill in the gaps, you will definitely see that we are expected to have some pretty strong instability across this region to support the possibility of a strong tornado or two. Taking a look at our bulk shear values and how that will indicate our hail risk across this region, we are expected to see some pretty strong bulk shear values as storms develop, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of 60 to potentially 70 knots across this region, maybe reaching an isolated 80 in some region. And even ahead of our storms, we have some pretty high bulk shear values, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of 50 to potentially 60, maybe even 70 knots ahead of our storms as well. So this is going to be a really well sheared environment and very supportive of the potential for massive hailstones in a very widespread area. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity so we can go over some general radar analysis. I'm not really going to go with timing right now because I just don't really feel comfortable doing timing while I'm sick because I'm going to get a lot of stuff wrong. So I'd rather just do a radar analysis for your guys' sake. So we already have some development that is forming along the differential heating boundary, and that's going to lead to that initial tornado risk and likely fizzle away pretty quickly. But then we are expected to see much more greater upscale growth across this region that could either become messy or could remain semi-discrete to even discrete across this region. We definitely have a couple of notable discrete supercells that are indicated to fire off across this region, but they are expected to rapidly organize into more of a messy to messy linear system as they move eastward, but as long as storms can remain discrete, they will have the highest tornado potential. But even as storms become much more messy and much more linear to linear messy, they could still support the potential for tornadoes, but that tornado risk will be much lower. Taking a look at our dew points and how that's expected to affect our instability, we are expected to see some really high dew point values across this region, with dew points that are expected to range anywhere from the mid 60s into potentially the low 70s. However, it does look like we may have a little bit of an overmixing problem because dew points are kind of spotty. They're not really organized. They're kind of all over the place in the warm sector right now. So we may have a little bit of a over mixing issue, which will definitely need to be watched because that will lead to overall less instability at the surface and could lead to more elevated storms. But still, regardless, we could see the potential of tornadoes even with a little bit of over mixing. But I think that's definitely something that needs to be monitored. Regardless, we will still have some pretty decent most unstable Cape values across this region as a result of some pretty high moisture values. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's expected to affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty hot temperatures across this region, with temperatures just to the south of the differential heating boundary that is expected to get upwards of the mid 80s to potentially the low 90s across this region. That is definitely going to be really, really hot across this region and support some remarkable instability, which we will look at. But with how hot it is expected to get at the surface, I definitely think we may need to watch for some over mixing. And for the majority of the risk, we are expected to see storms progress through the rest of the 10% tornado risk during the day. So we shouldn't really see too much of a issue with the lack of diurnal heating. But after storms move out of the 10% tornado risk, the sun is expected to set, and we will definitely see much more limited instability, more convective inhibition, and overall less of a tornado risk. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's expected to affect our instability across this region, just to the south of the differential heating boundary, we are expected to see some pretty high lapse rates, with lapse rates that are expected to get upwards of the low 8s or potentially the mid 8s even maybe ranging around the low to mid 8s. Just to the north of differential heating boundary, we are also expected to see some pretty decent lapse rates as well. Lapse rates in the mid 7s, which will definitely be a major aid to our overall instability as well as our overall hail risk, as it will expand that layer for hail development and allow for hail to develop longer and get to much bigger sizes. Plus, that will also lead to some much higher instability values. Taking a look at our satellite and how that will affect our cloud cover and our lapse rates and our instability, and why we may need to watch for some over mixing. I don't know why the satellite loop continues to put me in the center of the satellite view, but as of right now, you can clearly see that we do have a cumulus field over the majority of the warm sector, which is indicating some strong instability. And we also have a that differential heating boundary perfectly clear there, and we do have some development that is fired off of that differential heating boundary already. We don't have too terribly sunny skies. We definitely have the sun out. However, a lot of that cumulus may prevent some overmixing, but if storms can fire early enough, then they may not have to deal with overmixing. If they get fired within, I would say, the next hour or so, then we could see those storms work with our instability and work against overmixing. We may not see too many impacts if our storms can fire early enough. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperature and our convective inhibition, how that's going to affect our overall risk for severe thunderstorms and our instability. As of right now, the cap has already broken across this region, but we do have a really warm air advection out of the southwest at our 700 millibars, upwards of 50 degrees, which is extremely warm. So by the time that elevated mixed layer breaks, which it looks like it has already, we should see some more explosive storm development. Plus, that elevated mixed layer will likely lead to more instability overall at the surface, due to the fact that we will have that soda bottle cap effect, where we will have that instability build at the surface. However, with that extremely strong warm air advection, as the sun sets, we will see that cap be put in place extremely quickly. It actually does look like it may take a little bit of time. However, I don't have much confidence that this cap will really be overall too weak, and it will definitely choke out our storms. If our convective inhibition doesn't get put back in place, but our 700 millibar elevated mixed layer continues to be advected into this region in the middle of the night, that will be absolutely detrimental to storm development across this region. It will be really hard for any tornadoes to develop. Taking a look at our instability at our most unstable layer, and how that will affect our storm risk overall, and how that will fuel our severe thunderstorms across this region. We are expected to see large amounts of instability across this region, really strong amounts of instability, with K values that are expected to get uppers of the mid to potentially the upper 3000s in some regions. But definitely the widespread mid 3000s is expected, and that will definitely be able to fuel a risk for significant severe thunderstorms across this region. Again, the potential for strong tornadoes is definitely possible with this. Taking a look at our surface-based CAPE and how this is going to affect the risk for surface-based storms across this region, I don't really have too much to say about this, other than the fact that it does look like the majority of our most unstable CAPE is expected to translate down to our surface, so we shouldn't really have too much of a problem with surface-based storms. It does look like we may actually have weaker surface-based CAPE across this region, but we definitely do have some pretty strong most unstable CAPE values to make up for it. And we also have to look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability, which could be a massive aid, which we will look at. It does look like a surface-based instability is expected to continue into the afternoon hours, mainly to the south and southern central Texas, along the leading edge of more of a linear system. We could definitely see the potential for 1 or 2 brief tornadoes to spin along that line with some surface-based CAPE. However, it may be really hard with a constant warm air advection at our 700 millibars out of this region, preventing a whole lot of development. However, we definitely have a lot of surface-based CAPE across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that may aid with our overall risk for severe thunderstorms and the potential of strong tornadoes. Along the differential heating boundary, you can see that we have quite a lot of 0 to 3 kilometer instability along that differential heating boundary, which will likely be a massive aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, the potential for tornadoes. Further down to the south, when our more discrete storms develop, it does look like we are expected to have a pretty strong pool of 0 to 3 kilometer instability along the leading edge of some of these storms. With 0 to 3 kilometer instability values that could potentially reach the upper 100s and maybe even the 200s in some regions is definitely not out of the question. So that will definitely be a massive aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms, and we could see a hotspot for our cheat code to develop across this region. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that will indicate our tornado potential across this region. We are expected to see some pretty decently high energy helicity index values in the 10% tornado risk. They are a little bit lower than I previously expected, but they are definitely quite high, definitely indicating the potential for a few tornadoes. Plus, with the widespread semi-discrete supercells, that will definitely lead to more of an increased tornado potential. If we saw this kind of setup with a linear system, then the tornado risk would definitely be lower, but due to storm mode, that's definitely a big aiding factor. But we definitely have some pretty high energy helicity index values regardless, getting upwards of 2 to potentially 4, maybe even a 5 in some regions, which is definitely supportive of the potential for a few tornadoes across this region and potentially even a strong one. Taking a look at our significant tornado parameter based on our energy helicity index values, it's kind of similar to what it's indicating, with overall lower end significant tornado parameter values still indicating at least a small chance of a significant tornado. But again, you have to think of that storm mode. That's definitely going to be a aiding factor with our tornado potential across this region. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that will indicate the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region. We are expected to see some pretty scattered damaging wind gusts across this region. Definitely not widespread, but we could definitely see some damaging wind gusts that could potentially reach anywhere from 50 to potentially 60 miles per hour across this region. We aren't expected to see anything significant as far as damaging wind gusts goes. But we could definitely see some scattered damaging wind gusts across this region, and that risk will continue eastward into central Texas and southern central Texas into more of that linear mode, which will be overall more supportive of a damaging wind risk. But with the risk for severe thunderstorms lowering, we won't really see an increased damaging wind risk because that overall risk for severe thunderstorms will be lowering, but we could still see the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts into central Texas. Taking a look at our large hail parameter and how that will indicate our hail risk across this region, we have some really high large hail parameter values across this region, with large hail parameter values that are expected to get upwards of 32, potentially even 38 across this region. Definitely very supportive and indicative of the potential for massive hailstones across this region. As far as our significant hail goes, we do have a 4% for the main region of, or not a 4%, but just a 4 there for the main region of concern. For our SARS hail size, we are indicated to see the potential of hail that could potentially reach upwards of 3 to 4 inches across this region. And for our SARS SIG hail percentage across this region, we do have upwards of a 80% across this region. I'm not sure what the unshaded contours mean, but we do have an 80% and a 70% across this region. So a lot of models are indicating the potential for significant hail across this region. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong with this forecast, or you'd like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.